Hey up you buggers. Yeah, I thought I would grow a bit of long hair, and since we're going to be watching some hippie type TV, I thought we'd get into the swing of things, yeah. Ah dear, yes. I just need a better moustache and I look like Jeff Minter. What do you think? Right, anyway, it's that time again, folks. It's some classic computer themed TV. Yeah, we're going to be watching Microfile, which is Microfile takes the juiciest, most tender parts of Microlive and blends them all together. And yeah, you've got Microfile. Now, I've got to say, it's as dry. I mean, the content of Microfile, considering it's the juiciest parts, it's pretty dry stuff. Yeah, I could even possibly say boring, maybe. I mean, a lot of it, it's to say it's related to computers is extremely tenuous, the link. But anyway, yeah. Right, I've just got to say a massive thanks to Alex. I got your message, Alex, and it was really nice, mate. I did reply to you, but I will reply properly. But yeah, Alex sent me a wee message just about the channel, and you know what? It's things like that that kind of make me want to keep going. Yeah, the fact that anyone even enjoys any of this is what kind of keeps me going. So anyway, right, let's crack on. We're up to episode number 6. I will try and throw in some witticisms along the way to make it interesting. But at the same point, I don't want to become irritating. There is nothing worse than having somebody talking, as Arnold Schwarzenegger says, I hate it when people talk through the movie. Yeah, that was a bloody awful impersonation. Right, anyway, let's crack on with some Microfile. This should hopefully be episode number 7. Take it away. Are you getting any sort of like echo of that? Hopefully not. If you are, let me know. so lazy they didn't even attempt to change the intro. But then it was great to begin with. I'll shut up.
Hello, and
Ding
welcome
dong.
to this week's Microfile, which gives you a chance to see again some of the best items from the MicroLive series. This week, we take a look to the future. Throughout the series of MicroLive, we've heard of new research both in Britain and abroad. Research into new computer architecture, faster forms of memory, and in the first instance, an alternative for the cathode ray tube, which is that bulky flickering screen we've all become used to. Now, obviously, the prize will be great for the first flat screen, which can be run on a low voltage and be clearly visible from all angles. STC are confident that their labs at Harlow have the answer.
A new computer display screen is being developed here at the STL Labs in Harlow, which has significant advantages over the liquid crystal display screens available on current commercial computers. This Data General computer has one of the largest flat screens available today, and it's not all that popular. It has several disadvantages. Firstly, you have to view it at a rather narrow angle. If you move your head, the image can completely disappear. The contrast isn't all that high, and if you switch off the machine, the information disappears.
It's a Game Boy, isn't
Here,
it?
on the other hand, is a working prototype of the new thin flat screen they've developed. It's almost as good as looking at printing on a sheet of paper. The contrast and definition are so good. I can actually view it from any angle, and there's no fall-off in definition whatsoever. Perhaps even more importantly, this little example was connected 3 years ago, and the image is still there and readable. This display requires no refresh. Let's look at how this actually works. We've made a model of the display here with these two sheets of glass, and these are parallel lines of electrically conducting material photographically deposited on the surface of each of the plates. The surface of the plates and the real thing don't have to be optically perfect at all, and so ordinary glass can be used. The real problem was to keep the glass just 11 microns apart. That's about a quarter of the thickness of a human hair. And the solution turned out to be quite simple. They used small pieces of glass fibre threads thrown at random across the surface. We've represented them here by these small pieces of glass tube. The two plates are laid on top of one another like this, and the space in between the two plates is filled with a thick, viscous liquid. Where the lines cross, just like that, that square is in fact 1 pixel. And we can see this on the real thing by looking at it through the microscope. And you can see the real pixels there, and a few bits of the glass fibre. The real secret of the screen lies in this bottle. This is a very particular fluid that's been developed in this lab with very particular properties. A few drops of this is all that's needed to fill a normal-sized screen. When the molecules are lying at random, the light is scattered. When a high frequency is applied across the liquid, the molecules line up and the light can pass through the pixel. When it's switched off, the molecule stares the R and the image remains until a low frequency is passed, when once again the molecules are scattered. This is much simpler than normal liquid crystal displays, which require polarizing filters and an image that has to be constantly regenerated, or as it's known, refreshed. But one problem with this screen is that it needs 200 volts to flip the pixels from one state to the other. The big challenge here comes in providing circuitry that can cope with 200 volts and can connect all the edge connectors from the screen into the computer itself. We can see this on this screen here. On the top here we have 780 connections, down the side 400, giving a total of 1/3 pixels. Well, this makes this extremely expensive to produce, so they've produced a special chip, and you can see them here on this piece of film. When these chips are bonded to the surface, they'll transfer much of the circuitry to the screen itself, enormously reducing the number of external connections which are needed. Once the electronics are miniaturized in this way, the scientists here are confident this screen can be made cheaply, use hardly any power, and end up being very compact. In terms of patenting inventions, the labs here at STC have a good track record. For example, they claim that fibre optics communications were invented here. This is where specially treated glass is drawn out into a thin fibre for use in telecommunications. The glass filaments used in the new screen were a spin-off of this technology. But inventing something is one thing. Turning it into a commercial success is quite another. We seem to be good in Britain at innovating things and completely fail in marketing them. Are we going to be able to market this successfully?
Yes, that of course is a very good question. Our view is that we have to manage the exploitation just as well as we manage the research that leads to it. We've got to work out what the current technology can do, where it has a unique position, and so therefore where the customers are going to buy. And that has to be something that's as well managed, if not better managed even, than the research activity that's led to this product.
Are you really convinced this is going to be successful?
Personally, yes. I think this is one of the things that we must make work for Britain, and is a great tribute to the researchers in this laboratory.
What all this means is that we could have a high-resolution, non-flickering, portable, easily read screen the size of a piece of paper, or even larger, and all those cumbersome monitors will become a thing of the past. And there are new applications.
Yeah, right.
How about having an online display for your overhead projector? The resolution's excellent, it's in black and white, but the most exciting thing is that they hope to have a small colour version available for test within the next few months.
Well, storing large amounts of information became much more practical with the reliable magnetic disk. And if you use a standard 40-track floppy disk for your micro, then you can store 300 kilobytes of information, or the equivalent of 30 pages of a telephone directory on each disk. The most recent development, the Laserdisc, can hold up to 2 gigabytes. That's 2,000 million bytes, or 200 phone books. But FREF has been exploring the mud swamps of North America and has found something even more rapacious.
At the Mellon Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, work is going on to develop new solid-state devices to store information. Although it's still in the research stage, IBM is now funding the project. Leading the team is Professor Robert Burge. This is a memory storage device, but how much does it store?
This device will store up to 100 gigabytes of memory, which is approximately 100,000 times more than the average disk memory device can store. And it can store it on a very small piece, roughly 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, which allows for very high densities as well as very high speeds of memory access.
It's not exactly ready for the home market yet, is it?
Unfortunately not. We probably have at least 5 more years of development work to do, and there are a number of problems with it right now. For example, it has to work at 77 degrees above absolute zero, which is at liquid nitrogen temperatures, and that's not easily obtained in the home. And furthermore, it requires very expensive lasers to operate, 2 lasers in fact, and each of these lasers and present technology costs about $100,000.
The system uses a naturally occurring protein molecule called bacteriorhodopsin. It's found in the salt marshes of San Francisco. The molecule can exist in 2 forms, and these 2 forms can be used to store the digital information. So let's call them 0 and 1. State 0 can be flipped into state 1 by absorbing light from a green laser beam, and a red laser beam converts state 1 back into state 0.
Always dressed extremely smart with suits and what.
The green laser pulses on and off as it sends a stream of digital bits to the chip. In this way, it writes on the surface of the chip by flipping some of the molecules from state 0 to state 1. Reading the information back is more complicated. The same laser is then used to read the bits, and the way it does it is this. It scans the surface. Where it finds state 1 molecules, the laser beam travels right through the rhodopsin unchanged. But when it comes across a state 0 molecule, it flips it to state 1. As a result, some energy is absorbed, and the change in brightness of the beam is measured by a sensor behind the chip. However, in being detected, the bit has also been destroyed. So it's now the job of the red laser to reset the type 1 molecules to type 0 so that the chip is returned to its original state. It's rather like the way that old core memory stores worked, only much, much faster. Is it a fair thing to say that these technologies you're experimenting with here are the real future of electronics, not the semiconductor technologies we're all familiar with?
I believe in most cases it is, because these devices, because they're so small, can operate at speeds 10 to 100 times faster than semiconductors and in much smaller operating environments. And therefore, as computers become faster and faster, eventually we'll have to outgrow semiconductors and replace them with molecular devices because of their speed.
So, on 1 square centimetre of mud from the salt marshes of San Francisco, one day we may be able to store enough information to fill 10,000 phone books.
More than enough to hold the name and telephone number of everyone on Earth.
Although fast and easily accessible memory
I for
will
one will
obviously
not be
aid
going to crash
computing
alive.
speeds in the
Nobody's been held in
future,
the same
there is a
place.
limit to the speeds
But
available from the current processors.
Talk about that one later.
FREF moves east to New York City and Columbia University.
This is the inside of a VAX 11750, one of the most popular mini-computers in the entire world. And while it looks terribly complicated, it's actually based on a very simple idea. A processor and some memory linked by a single data stream. That's a structure known as a von Neumann machine, and it's pretty much the way every computer in the world is built, including the micro you have at home. But they're not all like that.
Is it the same jawline as Steve Tyler?
Meet a non-von Neumann machine, non-von 1, built here at Columbia University. It ran for the first time in January of 1985. Looks a lot simpler inside, and that's because it's based on a totally different type of computer architecture called parallel processing.
Parallel processing is an attempt to get round what's called the von Neumann bottleneck. Modern transistors, the calculating part of the computer, can perform quite complicated functions in a billionth of a second, but it could take 10 times longer for the result to be passed along the wires, even though it travels at half the speed of light.
Yeah.
Of course, one answer is to make the wires shorter.
Well, there's one critical problem with that, and that is heat. These elements that we now use that get these superb switching speeds also tend to dissipate a tremendous amount of energy. And when you compound that by cramming them all into a tiny amount of space, you can wind up with so much heat generated that unless you're very clever about the way you design your refrigeration system to go along with the raw machine, you wind up heating up those chips to the point where they don't work anymore. It turns out that silicon has a fairly narrow operating range of temperatures, and very quickly you wind up with something too hot to be practical. So in fact, the latest supercomputers really are very small, very highly efficient refrigerators.
The non-von answer relies on the fact that the processors, the chips containing the transistors, are now the cheapest part of many computers.
The machine that we're building right now, the non-von supercomputer, has a very large number of processors, each of which in fact is comparable to a small personal computer of the sort you might have at home. One important difference is that we have a lot more of them, each of whom can get instructions from the outside and have a little bit of local memory to store, say, a data element at a time and then process it independent of what anyone else is doing.
This independent processing, or processing in parallel, means that a problem can be broken into a number of components, each of which is solved at the same time and therefore faster. But there are some fundamental problems with this approach.
Probably the single most important one is communication. How do we get a machine designed in such a way that these different processors can talk to each other all at the same time and effectively and coordinate their execution of all these different pieces of the problem? That's the single hardest problem.
Give me 2 ticks, guys.
Connecting even a few processors together so that they can all talk to each other soon becomes unmanageable. So in non-von, the processors are organized in several different ways.
One of the key structures is what we call a binary tree, which is something that starts out with one processor up at the top that has 2 children, as we call them. Each of those have 2 children, and so on down to the bottom.
At present, non-von has only 64 processors, each on a separate chip. But the most recent development here is to put 8 processors configured in a tree format on a single chip. And eventually, they hope to have up to 1 million processors in future machines.
It's very exciting. The raw figures we get are absolutely astounding in terms of the amount of computational bang that you get for the buck. I don't know if that's an English expression, but what you get in terms of cost performance. But on the other hand, the basic problem that people may have is that if they got used to programming in Fortran or in C or in Pascal or a language like that, they may find the kinds of techniques that we use to be very foreign.
The non-von uses a parallel version of the programming language Lisp, and some types of calculations can be speeded up 100-fold.
Suppose we had a business and we were trying to raise the salary of everybody in the sales department by 10%, but not raising anybody else's salary. We would store each employee record in a separate processor, and then there would be a series of instructions, each of which would be executed simultaneously by all of the different processing elements, but on their own employee record. That might say something like this. You could start by saying, take a look inside your department field. if it's not equal to sales, then turn yourself off temporarily and don't listen to what I'm about to say. Then the next set of instructions would say, multiply your salary field by 1.1.
Probably not
And
far
at the end
off,
of that set of
Craig.
instructions, all of the salesmen would have their raises. And then we send out another single instruction which says, now everybody wake up and start listening again. So that's a typical way that in a short fixed amount of time, all of those different processors have done something to their individual memory elements.
Non-VON is the culmination of 5 years' work here at Columbia University, but this is not the only place that parallel processing is being explored. In a number of schools around the country, alternative approaches are being experimented with, and more than one company is set to release an actual commercial parallel processing computer. The one thing that all the creators of these different approaches believe in common is that their machines are the machines of the future.
The non-VON approach to parallel processing uses a large number of small processors. By contrast, the Bristol-based firm of Inmos offers build-it-yourself parallel processing. You buy as many as you like and slot them together in parallel. But that does not mean wiring up 1 million chips, for the Inmos approach uses much more powerful 32-bit processors, so you might only need 5 or 10. The principle is the same, though, with each chip having its own processor, its own onboard memory, and communication links with another chip or the outside world. Mac spoke to Phil Atkins from Inmos, who writes the demonstration software.
Phil, I really like your butterflies here. What are they showing?
It's a very simple demonstration, actually, just showing a pair of transducers talking to each other. We've got one transducer generating the images on this screen, one transducer generating the images on this screen. It's not that simple, though. One of the transducers is generating a butterfly which is flying between the screens, so that data is being transferred from one transducer
There
to
it is. It's the blue one. There it goes. It's just switched over.
We're using about 1% of the transducer's total resource. It's simply a demonstration of concurrency communication.
Now, can you buy this transducer today?
You can indeed. You can buy this board, which will plug straight into your IBM PC. Here's the transducer, 2 megabytes of memory and interface logic to connect from the transducer to the IBM PC.
That's 2 megabytes of memory. How fast is it?
That's about 10 MIPS.
That's about 10 times faster than the ordinary IBM A2, which is the fastest IBM PC.
That's right. You can plug 5 of these into the A2, in fact, giving you 50 MIPS.
50 minutes, I can't believe it. How much is really usable?
45, 46 is pretty good.
That's very impressive. How do you program it? What languages are you using?
Fortran, C, Pascal, and Occam.
Occam? What is Occam?
That's the language we developed at Inmos to program multi-transducer systems.
Well, we used to Pascal, we used to C and Fortran. Why do we need another language, Occam?
Well, you can program a single transducer in C, Pascal, but bind the entire system together in Occam to create a multi-transducer environment.
Is it difficult to learn?
It's not difficult at all, in fact.
Good. Well, I'll come back to you later, Phil. We've also been joined by the marketing manager of Inmos. Welcome. Tell me, Chris, how much is it going to cost?
The particular board that we've just seen there, Mac, sells for £2,900, but for you, £5,000.
Oh, that's a real bargain. What about the chip itself?
The chip at the moment is selling for £420, but we expected that price, as with all semiconductor devices, to fall to around £50 over the next couple of years.
So that seems to be a good reason why I shouldn't buy one for 2 years.
Only if you want your competitors to get ahead of you, Mac.
So I should buy one now and really get to know how to use it?
Absolutely.
Do I get a copy of Occam with it? Does that come free?
You buy the Occam at a slightly additional price. The compiler and that for the AT all come together.
And I suppose I've got to pay twice as much for the Occam as anybody else.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Tell me, how do you envisage it being used? What's the market for
There are many applications for the transducer that we're being designed in today, right from supercomputers through CAD workstations down to process control applications. One particular application that it's being designed into at the moment is the fingerprint project, which is being developed for the Home Office. In that system, the system takes and codes somebody's fingerprint and generates a 1 kilobyte image of that fingerprint. This is then distributed along to an array of over 1,100 transducers.
So that the actual image of the fingerprint is put in the memory inside the transducer itself?
Each transducer has a copy of that, and then the database from the Winchester is passed past those transducers, and they search then for the match.
And how big is the database?
Well, the database at the moment is building up. There are 3.5 million criminals in this country, all of which have, say, 10 fingers, depending on their crimes. Each finger is a kilobyte, so we have 35 gigabytes of data that have to be searched. The system they're using today is based on some mini-computers and takes roughly 20 days, or would do, to search for that database, which is clearly impractical. With the transputer-based system, they can bring that down to a couple of hours. And by increasing, again, the number of transputers, you can get that down further.
So criminals, watch out. Where else do you see it being used?
The transputer is also very good for graphics applications. You can take a graphics image and break it up into separate parts and give each one of those parts to one transputer. Many transputers can then generate one frame, and many other transputers can then generate multiple frames, giving you real-time animated graphics.
Some of the stuff we've been seeing in the past is one giant computer just doing one particular screen and then filming it and making it look continuous. You brought some very nice illustrations of graphics along today. Let's go and have a look at them. Phil, what have you got here?
I've actually got a very powerful machine here. 22 transputers working together to generate these images.
Slow down a minute. 22 transputers, is that 220 million instructions per second?
That's right, this is very powerful.
So that's the equivalent to 2,200 IBM ATs.
Yeah, I can demonstrate that, in fact.
Just to do a picture?
Just to do a picture. It's actually a very complex picture. It's a Mandelbrot set, it's a fractal. It's very compute intensive to generate this. About 6 hours on an IBM AT, and watch this. Very few seconds.
Now, just to repaint that screen would take 6 hours on
At least 6 hours, something like 30 hours on the BBC Micro. We're about 7,200 times as fast as a BBC Model B here.
And each one of these lines here is actually being generated by an independent...
by a different transputer, and they're being combined on the graphics system.
And 22 of them all intercommunicating. We can actually see it operating on a BBC Micro to see something and compare the actual things. There it is. It's slightly different colours. No, it isn't. Well, you can also cycle the colours on this, can't you?
I can, yeah, watch this.
Go on. It's doing a lot of calculations now. There it goes. Well, that's very, very pretty indeed. Thank you very much, Phil.
Well, those graphics make real-time animation seem much nearer. Of course, most computer animation is achieved by lengthy drawing of individual pictures, which are then transferred to a single frame of film or videotape, and then run at speed to achieve the effect of motion. So, to finish the programme, take another glimpse at the futuristic and expensive world of the computer artist, as seen at the 1985 Computer Animation Film Festival.
Oh, this guy playing the bloody piano again. What about 15 years later you got something like Toy Story? I've seen this one 1,000 times.
Micro Live runs from October to March with a topical weekly show that keeps you up to date with the new technology, its applications and its implications. See you there. Bye-bye.
The state of that thing behind it is all bloody needs repainted. There you have it, folks. That was episode 7. We'll go for one more if you want it anyway. In fact, you know what, I want to watch it, so let's get it going. So that was number 7, and this is going to be number 8. Right, number 8, enjoy. Mamemeister. Meister May, yeah, I remember that takes me back. Yeah.
Deep in the heart of the Berkshire countryside at Genetic Studios near Reading, London band Then Jericho and their producer Martin Rushent are listening to the final mix of Fault, a song for the band's debut album.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't show things like this, Richard. Like there's no interest in it. Like yourself.
Rushent is well known for his use of computer-aided music production with bands like Human League and Visage.
Just a few years ago, the job of record producer was really coaxing the best performance out of an artist that was possible. Now we use computers to aid that process in quite a serious way. I think one of the changes, not so much in my job, but in the way I interrelate with the people I'm working with, is that composition and ideas are now much more important than the ability to play technically.
The production process begins for Rushent when he listens to the band's demo tape. He must first decide where and if computers can help.
Yeah, all right. What's the tempo on it now?
110.
110. That's okay, tempo's fine. But it's got to be... If we're going to make a dance rock track, then we've got to hold the tempo all the way through. So I think we'll use some machine assist on it, on the drums, possibly on bass too. I think the intro's a bit long, isn't it? Don't you think?
You can cut the intro in half, yeah.
You can cut it in half. What, both sections of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The intro and the
so the
funky
flow of
bit.
the intro will be the same, except
Cut the
each
whole thing
section
in
will be shorter.
And then go straight into the verse.
All right, well, look, what we're going to do now, we've got the tempo 110. Yeah. OK, we'll get the part written out and program up a Lin guide pattern for you. And then we'll take it from there, yeah?
So it gives us 4 bars. Right.
Then Jericho's drummer, Stephen Wren, works with Rushent's assistant to program a basic drum pattern into the Lin drum. This won't end up on the finished track. It's a guide to ensure that all the other electronic instruments keep time. The Lin drum is not, strictly speaking, a synthesizer. The sounds are digital recordings of real drums, encoded on a memory chip.
Well, the Lin drum was really, a few years ago, was a real breakthrough in drum machine technology. Before then, you'd had these purely sort of things that didn't really sound like drums at all. The Lin really did sound vaguely like a drummer. And we use it to lay down the basic patterns and ideas of the drummer on tape to use as a sort of check against what we're doing, to make sure that our higher level machines are playing the basic patterns correctly.
I think this film may be totally missing the point.
The very first electric instrument was the telharmonium, demonstrated in 1906 in America by its inventor Thomas Cahill. Cahill discovered that by spinning a notched metal disc in a magnetic field, he could create an electrical impulse that would make a musical sound when played through a telephone earpiece. By adding together the output of several different discs, it was possible to create quite complex sounds. The 200-ton machine was used for a time to broadcast concerts over the Bell telephone system in New York. These ceased when an irate stockbroker, fed up with the interference on his line, purchased the instrument and threw it in the river.
Jesus.
But the father of the modern synthesizer is undoubtedly Dr. Bob Moog. The Moog modular synthesizer first became widely heard in 1968 on a record called Switched On Bach by Walter, now Wendy, Carlos. It was big brother to the best-known synthesizer of all time, the Mini Moog.
Okay, Steve, looks like that's the program. Let's see how it plays.
The various machines at Genetic Studios can send each other electronic signals to keep in time. Useful here because Russian's master plan for the track involves recording most of the drum kit onto tape in the ordinary way, but generating the snare and bass drum sound from the synclavier, a sophisticated computer and digital synthesizer. So while the cymbals and tom-toms are unalterably committed to tape, Steve and Neil can tinker with the snare and bass drum sound until they're both completely satisfied.
Now it sounds much too heavy.
A bit louder now.
Yeah, it's too loud.
All right, let's stop this then.
The Angelico, I do remember them. I can't remember any songs that they sung.
35.0. Let's try and halve it down to 35%.
The first time I ever played a Prophet synthesizer, I knew immediately I wanted one. It was the first synthesizer to use a microprocessor inside the synthesizer itself to control not only the sounds and the development of the sounds, making them very precise, but also to read the keyboard so that when you play a note, you're not just closing an electrical switch, but this little brain on a chip is actually walking through each key in turn to see if you're doing anything with it. And you get a very alive sense of feedback from the machine. It uses analog oscillators, such as we've heard and love, which perhaps makes it not as bright sounding as some of the more recent instruments. And one of the sad things, of course, about analog oscillators is that they go out of tune very easily. So if you're playing in a concert and suddenly your synthesizer goes out of tune, you can press this tune button,
it's like the
nothing goes
Warriors
away,
music,
and you
actually.
can wander off stage and have a rub down. And by the time you get back, the thing will have tuned itself,
Can I see that,
and
mate?
it should be perfect.
This is ridiculous. This film is still missing the point.
Is that Stephen Fry? I don't think I quite look at that old what was the thing before? I can't remember.
I think that a lot of work has disappeared for musicians in the last 4 or 5 years, especially in London, where sort of a lot of, I mean, with the agreement in some instances of the Musicians Union, in some instances despite the union, musicians in orchestra pits, musicians in studio sessions and so on, have actually found work slipping away from them because it is easier or cheaper to use either a pre-programmable synthesizer, a drum machine, whatever it might be, to create fairly regular sounds.
In many areas of live work with groups, they don't represent any real threat at all. But it's in mainly the area of media work and recording that their use has become of great worry to us in certain areas where many more musicians were implied than are being used at the moment. And the union's policy is to endeavour to control their uses in
I was
areas
just
where
thinking
we're
that,
able to do
Richard. It
so.
did look a bit like, is it
But
Ronnie
the problem
Brown
isn't
from the Corries?
confined to recordings. In 1982, Barry Manilow toured Britain. On previous tours, he'd used a full orchestra of British musicians. This time, he replaced them with a rhythm section and just 3 American synthesizer players.
Now, this is something obviously the union can't accept and will do all it can to try to prevent that situation, because it's clearly that synthesizers are being used in that instance instead and as a substitution for string players, because that is really the sound that's wanted.
Well, I think the pulsing bits we'll program, yeah? We'll sample a sound off you.
Yeah.
And we'll program them in.
Yeah, you need a more constant level out of it if you do it.
Yeah, right. And that'll also, we'll be able to lock something up with it. That acoustic we were talking about when we were working the track out, we can lock up with that.
At the end part, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the intros and some of the accents, we'll play those live. and mix them in with the machine pulse. Okay, Jasper, what we're going to do is we're going to sample this high G into the synclavier, right? Okay, now, I'll do a counting because otherwise no one knows when we're going to start. And Neil's got to hit his button before you play to set the computer storing. So if I count 4 in, if you hit it on the 4 and you hit it on the 1, we just want one note, let it last as long as you can, and as clean as you can, all right? You ready, Neil?
I'm ready.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's good. Okay, that looks good. So let's hear the high G back first before we sample the next one, whilst we're set up on it. That sounds all right. Good. Jasper, play us it again, just so we can get a comparison. So that's the real one. Okay, let's hear your one again. Yeah, perfect, identical. Okay, if you can Mark start that one. One of the interesting side effects of digital synthesizers is, as we mentioned before, their ability to sample sounds. Not just sounds like elephants trumpeting and telephones, but actually off other people's records. Drum sounds, bass sounds, brass sounds. In fact, it goes on all the time. I've had cases of I've heard a record and I thought I'll steal the snare drum sound off that. It's really nice, and got it in the machine and looked at the waveform and found out it was one of mine that's been pinched from somewhere else. So it's going on all the time, and I do it quite a lot. What the publishers and people like that are going to say when they find out actually what's going on is going to be rather interesting. But to give you an example of some of the things that are done, I've got an album here by an unknown who I think's got a real future, a man named Mr. David Bowie. And about a couple of years ago, he put out an album with a track on it called Let's Dance, and the bass drum and snare drum sound on that record was rather good, and has been pinched by many people, including me. So let me just play you.
Naughty.
Bit of Let's Dance. So, this is Let's Dance by David Bowie, which I think is familiar to some people anyway. So we rather craftily sampled the bass drum and snare drum sound off that record. In fact, I've got it loaded in the machine at the moment. Sometimes this machine decides that we're doing something that really is morally wrong and refuses to do it. However, we're trying to teach it that we live in the real world and not in some sort of utopia. So, Neil is going to reboot this machine so that I can show you. It doesn't like me stealing. So as I was saying before the machine decided to disobey, I've loaded in the sounds from this Bowie track in here, the bass and snare drum. It's quite remarkably similar. So we used that on an album by a young man called Billy Mackenzie, who trades under the name of The Associates, on a track called 13 Feelings, which if I can just...
sadly no longer with us.
And it's not necessarily so that we use the sound exactly the same as we've sampled it. We may tailor it to suit our own particular track. Which band is it? 2, okay. But I think it's recognisable Right. That's the same drum sound from the record we heard before. Because it doesn't sound exactly the same because we've tailored it to suit our own track, but it was the character that we were after. And no doubt some crafty devil has sampled that sound and used it on his record.
I can see.
Right, so what that is, that's a voice called I Can See. It's actually a voice that's been sampled. Somebody actually said that into a microphone, and it was stored inside the Fairlight. By digitising it into its memory, it actually fills up 128k of RAM. That 128k of RAM is in here. This is the CPU unit, which also houses the disk drive and the hard disk drive. When we actually sample a sound in here, so that the Fairlight can deal with it, it divides it into 128 different segments Okay, and if we go on to page D, you can actually see every fourth segment, and they're actually stacked behind each other to give you a much more visual representation of the sound. Right, I can go back to page 2 again, and we can load in some more sounds. We can load in the sound here, which is a sort of fuzz guitar sound. Or this kind of sound, which is quite a famous sound. It's called Orc 2. Okay, you don't actually have to sample a sound to be able to create sound on the Fairlight. You can actually generate your own by drawing waveforms, and that's what page 6 is all about. If we have a look at page 6, we can go to the first segment.
Oh, really?
Remember that we've got 128 of them. And we can draw a very basic waveform like this, and then fill that in. Then we can go along to segment 128, and we can draw a much more complex waveform. It's going to sound very... It's going to have a lot of high frequency information in it, and fill that in. And if we go to page D, you can actually see that. There's segment 1, the very boring waveform, and there's segment 128. What I'm going to do now is ask the computer to fill in the gaps and merge from this to this. And we do that on page 6. Sort of interpolation, so that the sound will actually change as it's being played rather than remain static. And here's page D showing it actually happening.
So what kind of synths did Jean-Michel Jarre use?
Right, there's also another page in the Fairlight called page R, and that's a rhythm sequencer page.
That thing that you've
and
got
you
is
use that to load in several different sounds and get them to play simultaneously.
I can see.
Sequencers, as we know them today, are digital devices. They're capable of storing entire pieces of music, just an electronic representation of a score, just as a word processing disk is an electronic representation of a document. What you can do with a word processor with words, you can do in a sequencer, a good sequencer now, with musical entities like notes.
The microprocessor has made music controllable for the first time. For the first time, musicians and composers can actually consider music out of real time, the piece of jargon that suggests that it's live. We've had recording studios and so on for the sort of best part of this century, but it's not been very malleable, not very manipulable. But now music can actually be shifted away from the moment it's created to a point where it can live in computer memory and can be manipulated to one's heart's content before it's broadcast or before it's performed.
Sometimes I hear a record and go, that drummer is magnificent.
So is it that guy that's...
What tremendous feel and power and stuff there, and only to find out 2 weeks later I've been listening to a machine. But I haven't been listening to a machine. I've been listening to a human mind working through a machine. You know, I mean, I don't think it makes you any a better carpenter by the fact that you can bash nails in with your fist with no machine. You know, the smart guy uses a hammer. It's less painful.
That's a shame.
This film is totally missing the point.
Most people think of synthesizers as keyboard instruments. When this advert appeared in 1981, the company concerned was deluged with inquiries from guitarists. Unfortunately, even the mighty Apple computer wouldn't support a guitar neck.
There's some guy that made a
The ad
guitar
was a spoof
using
to sell
the Commodore
software.
64. It did look a bit shit.
synthesizer works like this. The pitch and dynamics of each string are detected by this hexaphonic pickup and then relayed to the floor module, where a computer recognizes the pitch and converts it to a binary code. The synthesizer also recognizes pitch bend. And in terms of sounds, it's really like any keyboard synthesizer.
Yeah, I love Howard Jones. Saw him back in 1986, I think.
By using the string select function, you can assign the synthesizer sound to individual strings on the guitar, and this allows you to blend with the regular guitar sound. And by using the hold function on the synthesizer, you can sustain the sound indefinitely. And by presetting different tunings into the memory banks, you can transpose the held chord while playing on top.
I think this film's missing the point because I think there's a high concentration here on the professional and on the most expensive and the most elaborate and the most advanced equipment available. And the whole point that all of that technology and all of that experimentation and all of that extraordinary resource is available at a lower level, albeit, to anybody in the street. They can go out and buy a synthesizer tomorrow in a small 4-track recording studio, and they can actually make a record in their bedroom. That's quite simple. The only difference will be quality and quantity, but that apart, the technology is exactly the same.
What costs £20,000 now will cost £1,000 inside a few years. And I think that's going to mean that such power is accessible to all. And I think that's probably the most significant change. After that, we're then going to begin to find out what we can do with the machines.
Because the whole point about this sort of technology is that once it's begun from its very, very base root, and that was the point at which, if you like, Bob Moog's voltage-controlled oscillator moved from being that to being a digital device, the minute that happened, everything is thrown into a process of change, and there's nothing that can be done to halt or slow down that process. I don't know whether I answered the question. I can't remember what it was.
This hasn't put in the mid-toss into some mod files, you know what I And there you have it, folks. Yeah, that was what one was that? That was number 7, I think it was. Yeah, number 7. Do you want one more? Do you want one more? Let me know. If you want to watch one more, we'll do it. I'm actually off tomorrow, so I don't have to get to bed too early. Put your hand up if you want another one. If anyone else wants to watch one with me, then we'll do it. Who's up for one more episode? The Oxmeister is in. Yeah, that'll do, mate. That'll do. Okay. LFC says, might as well. Don't sound so fucking enthusiastic. Oh, Christ. Okay, Al. Bloody hell. Right, yeah, we're going to watch one more. So that was episode number 7, I think it was. Or was it number 8? Number 8, I think. Let me have a look. Excuse me. Just pause that. That was number 8, so we're going to do number 9. You'll be pleased to know there's 10 episodes in season 1, or sorry, not season, series 1, and then there's a season 2 or series 2, which we may or may not may or may not watch. I enjoy these. I think it's great fun watching these things. They're still interesting. Right, this is number 9.
This dissertation will show that the love of a man and a woman is not the love of steak and lettuce. Love is interesting to me and fascinating to you, but it is painful to Bill and Diane. That is love.
And that was a poem.
Foxy.
I wonder whether you could tell whether it was written by a person or by a machine. And suppose it was written by a machine. Would it make the machine intelligent?
Sorry, just a quick one. Did anybody... I was listening to the radio today, and apparently there's a new song that's... I can't even remember what it's called. There's a song, and what they've done is using artificial intelligence. They've actually released the song using Elvis. Elvis is actually singing it, and it sounds exactly like Elvis. It's bloody mental.
What does machine intelligence mean anyway? Well, in an attempt to find out, today Microlives takes a first look at so-called artificial intelligence, or AI for short. And we're going to look especially at what are known as expert systems.
40 years ago, the British scientist Alan Turing studied the way that computers might be able to reason, making use of information fed into them about the real world. Turing proposed a famous test.
Really?
Is it possible for a machine to fool people sitting at terminals into believing they're dealing with a human being at the other end of the wire when they're actually dealing with a machine? If so, you could say that a machine showed artificial intelligence.
Well, as you've probably guessed, our poem was produced by a computer program called Ractor and published recently in this book. This is the first ever anthology of computer-generated poetry, and it's got some splendid illustrations with it. But Ractor is more than a machine for producing poetry. You can also have a conversation with it. And I wonder, would Ractor pass the Turing test? We sent our American reporter Fref to New York to visit Ractor and its creator, Bill Chamberlain. Bill lives in an apartment in Greenwich Village, along with Ractor, the raconteur, and its 2,400-word vocabulary.
Hello, I'm Ractor. Are you Bill?
No, I am Fref.
I may call you Fref, then?
Well, it's very polite. Of course. Why do you think I am here?
Why do you think I'm here? Let's see what it does with that. Now, it's parsing the input in some regard. To think is right, don't you think? Maybe because computers prefer cleverness. And as you implied before, I have to rest now.
Ractor's ravings are indeed ravings, but there is an undeniable sense of structure to them. What's the trick?
Ractor essentially is a core program which can conjugate verbs and make the plurals of nouns and keep track of the definite article. And then it has two separate file structures. One is a file structure of sort of elemental building blocks of sentences, sentence forms. For example, an elementary form might be the noun verbed the noun. It is a very simple one. But suppose Ractor picked that without making one up. It can construct them as well, but let's deal with a given. It then would go to the dictionary file and find relevant parts of speech to fill in the blanks in the sentences. However, were it to do this completely at random, it might say, The parking meter ate the president. Now, that is a perfect declarative statement in English. It's grammatically correct, but it also is nonsense. So clearly, you must relate the database entries to each other in some consistent fashion so they can relate to each other. So when you have a sentential form, the parts of speech will not merely be grammatically correct, they will be, quote, meaningfully correct as well. And the way we chose to do that is to preface each entry with a nominal character string, 12 characters. We call it an identifier, and it relates every entry to every other entry. By the way, Fref, what is your last name?
My last name. It's asking me something I can't answer it. I don't have a last name, so I guess I'll have to lie to the machine. My last name is Fref. Since my name is actually just Fref all by itself, we'll see how it takes to being hoodwinked.
Fref, huh? Sounds vaguely familiar.
Well, it should.
I wonder. Next question.
All right, now I'm going to ask it for a story. Let's see.
Yes, will you tell me a story?
Will you tell me a story?
It's checking for the word story, yes. I recently heard this. Now, this is prosynthesis. Diane chanted, "The jackal is interesting."
The jackal is interesting. Nevertheless, obscure, enrapturing scientists will think about blue cottages or blue conic sections. Diane hummed to Diane within a station wagon. It actually was an automobile, and a jackal in an automobile is scary. Now, Sarah and Diane were sauntering to a white studio, and a hound sashayed to them. Diane was angry. Interesting. Yet Diane was enraged during the time that Sarah gulped tepid sherry. She and Diane cried about their mansion, car, and phonograph. Novelist. Charlotte Bronte had many good qualities, like fiction. But even Charlotte Bronte was afraid of work. Next question?
Next question. That's an example, by the way, of prosynthesis. That existed nowhere in the world before now. The computer just made that up.
As Bill Chamberlain explained, as a programmer, he's given Racter grammatical rules and its vocabularies of linked words. Though, to some extent, the machine chooses these randomly. Now, it's rather similar to this. The words on these discs have been chosen by a sociologist. The outer ring has nouns. The two inner discs, which spin independently, have adjectives. But whichever combination of three words you end up with, you'll find that you've got a sort of meaningful-sounding, jargon-ridden phrase, like multi-theoretical reorganization.
Well, you can buy packages from many micros which give you Racter-like responses. Probably the best known is called ELIZA, named after a program which was produced in the mid-60s as a spoof to imitate a conversation with a psychiatrist. Well, here is ELIZA, and it's asking me, please tell me your problem. And I said, my dog is ill, which it isn't. Why does it matter to you that your dog is ill? And I put in, it might die.
Who gives a shit?
Does that have anything to do with the fact that your dog is ill? Well, that's a stupid question for a start. You fool.
Stupid bastard.
Perhaps you are the fool. Well, clearly, this is not really accepted as an example of artificial intelligence, although the original did fool a lot of people.
So we are still left with that question, what is artificial intelligence? Now, one way to describe it may be getting computers to do better those things which at present humans do better than computers. Now, computers are clearly much better than us at some things already, especially anything mathematical or very highly defined, like counting or sorting. For instance, it would take me ages to count all the words in this document, and I'd probably still get them wrong, but with a couple of key presses, I get the total, 1,130 words, you see. Now, the computer can do that because it has all the information necessary to solve that particular problem. On the other hand, if someone says, hand me that cup of tea, well, although we'd find it very easy, a computer wouldn't. It would have to understand the words, move to the table, stop without bumping into it, recognise a cup of tea amongst everything else that's on the table, and then control an arm to pick it up, hopefully without spilling it. In other words, it would need a lot of general knowledge and a lot of common sense. Getting computers to understand language, recognise objects, to reason and to do useful tasks are long-term goals of the artificial intelligence engineer. But how far off are they? Edward Feigenbaum is one of the world experts on AI.
It's important to understand that people have a strong advantage in tasks that require the eyes, the ears, the manipulators, the locomotion. Evolution has perfected our mechanism to see, to hear, to do things in the world. Machines find that very difficult. Therefore, any tasks that require a very broad base of knowledge will be very hard for machines to handle for the next several decades, perhaps somewhere between 50 and 100 years before we assemble enough knowledge to genuinely give a computer a common sense knowledge of the world.
A great deal of work is going on to give computers more human-like skills. This prototype robot security man with cameras in its head appears to be moving cleverly. It's certainly an ingenious piece of engineering. But it's actually controlled by a human operator. For the machine to interpret pictures from its own cameras and take the appropriate steps is a very complex problem. Today's computer vision systems are really quite primitive. This one can pick out a piece of metal by tracing the outline of its silhouette. It can pick up a single isolated metal object it's been shown and trained to recognize and reject anything else that doesn't fit the pattern it's been taught. But it couldn't pick out the object if it was all piled up with others. Humans, on the other hand, find pattern recognition quite easy. Huge investments are being made in the United States and Japan to develop machines that can understand speech.
Please state your flight destination.
San Francisco.
San Francisco. From which airport are you planning to depart?
Newark.
Newark. The following flights are available from Newark to San Francisco.
This prototype airline booking service is for the American phone company AT&T. It understands single words from a range of people, but it's supposed to ask you to repeat sounds it doesn't recognize.
On what day of the week are you planning to depart to San Francisco? Saturday. You want complete flight description.
My view is that by the middle of the 1990s, and perhaps well before, we will see the voice-activated typewriter. Now, when we say voice-activated typewriter, I don't mean simply single-word isolated speech recognition. I mean continuous speech understanding.
Yeah, you're not far wrong.
But today's most promising commercial products of AI are not in these areas where the computer needs a vast reserve of general knowledge or common sense. They're the so-called expert systems. These are pieces of software which concentrate on specialized areas of knowledge, like diagnosis of specific diseases or calculating housing benefits. And with them, surprisingly, computers are now beginning to give the kind of advice that experts in these fields might give, always provided their knowledge can be put into the computer in the first place.
Expert systems are being used increasingly in areas where human experts are not always around. In this Scunthorpe steel rolling mill, for example, hot steel billets are rolled out into rods 24 hours a day. As the rod hurtles about, it's important to prevent what's known as a cobble. If this happens in the middle of the night, the fault can be diagnosed by the operators using this ICL expert system. It uses rules of thumb which the chief works engineer has learnt over his years of experience in the plant. These were teased out of him by the computer system designer, the knowledge engineer, and put in the software. By simply feeding in information about the conditions of various pieces of equipment, the system comes up with the best guess about what's wrong. In this case, the computer has detected a scanner head fault. Some notable expert systems are being used in hospitals for diagnosis. In the middle of the night, a patient has acute abdominal pain. A junior hospital doctor doesn't have access to a specialist.
What kind of pain is it?
It's a sore pain, but it's not all that bad.
Doesn't come and go in waves.
No.
By making a careful clinical examination of the patient and feeding the findings into the expert system, it comes up with a probable diagnosis. Medicine is an area where there's always uncertainty. Even specialists can be wrong. It's 61% likely in this case that the patient has appendicitis.
Because he's got a sore stomach.
And 20% likely that he has Crohn's disease. These systems are proving of real value for newly qualified doctors.
Their accuracy coming a year after qualification is about 50% without the system. With the system of documentation and the computer, their mean average is about 75, which is very close to consultant.
The Turing Institute in Glasgow specialises in getting expert systems like that up and running. I've been joined by their director, Professor Jim Alty. Jim, what are the essential ingredients of an expert system?
Well, I think, Mac, the best way to explain that is to give you an example. We've used an expert system tool here to set up a simple expert system to really illustrate some of the points I want to make. It's a fairly simple system. It advises us on what type of safety fence we need on a road, a motorway or a small road, to prevent cars going off the road and whatever. So let's first of all simply set the system going and see what answers we get. Now you can see it's now asking me what is the speed limit at the point under consideration, and this will look like an exactly normal program at this time, and we'll answer 70 miles an hour. Now you'll find when it answers this that we can do something rather different with an expert system. It's asking us here, where should we put the fence? On the verge, central reserve, or a node, or whatever. But we can do something different. We can actually ask, why? Why are you asking us this question?
I don't think I've even touched on
and when it does
this,
it comes back with a rule. And you can see the rule is saying, if the speed limit is greater than or equal to 60, and the site being considered is the central reservation, the road type is rural, etc., the traffic level is very heavy, then in fact a safety fence is needed.
Because this acts almost as an audit trail to the expert to make sure it's absolutely correct. That why is a very important part of an expert system.
This is the key principle, actually. The knowledge is stored in the programme as it is written here. So that if in fact an accountant was looking at this, or a road designer, he would understand it. Whereas in a traditional programme, if an accountant looked at it, he wouldn't understand the code.
So if, for example, the tax rates changed, the accountant, first of all, wouldn't know where to find the tax rate, and he wouldn't know how to change them if it was written, for example, in COBOL, but here he could actually check it out.
Exactly, and it's important, of course, because with experts, their expertise changes. You can't freeze an expert's knowledge.
Well, all this isn't so far from the home micro as you might think. Jonathan Briggs is from Kingston College of Further Education, where part of his job is to explain to students and their teachers about how expert systems work. Jonathan, before we go any further, am I right in thinking that your pupils aren't really doing computer studies, are they?
No, lots of other things. Beauty therapy, motor maintenance, a wide range of stuff.
Far removed from computers, in fact.
Yes.
Right, well, this is one system you've devised as a teaching aid. It's called MITSI, that's M-I-T-S-I.
That's right,
what does that stand for?
It's a man-in-the-street interface. It isn't an expert system shell. What it is, it's an interface to a programming language called microprolog. What I've done so far, I'm going to put in some facts and rules, and here are some. There are 3 facts and 1 rule. It's about food. I've got some facts, meat contains protein, etc. And then a rule about why we eat particular things. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's actually quite difficult to understand because of the way that it's laid out. That's the language problem, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is an interface to Prolog. Prolog is quite a strict language, just like any other computer language.
Right. So can we ask it a question?
All right. Let's say, is it true that meat is eaten for growth? All right.
Even the question is carefully structured, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And it comes back and says yes.
Now, can we ask it why it said yes?
Why? And it says meat is eaten for growth because meat contains protein and protein needed for growth. It's used the rules and come up with that as an answer.
So it is actually a baby expert system?
Well, sort of,
But it's not a really easy interface, is it?
No. Well, over here on the Nimbus, I've got another system. Remember, what we're trying to do is write things that will help students and teachers understand what expert systems are.
Now, so you've got a set of rules here, and these really are in plain English, apart from the fact that they're sort of formally laid out.
Yes.
And it seems to be something about soufflés. Why have you chosen soufflés as an
All right,
example?
we wanted a fault diagnosis system, and we had to choose something that people would understand.
Right.
And soufflés, when you're cooking a soufflé, that's something that often goes wrong. So that seemed to be something we could do a fault diagnosis system about.
Let's see how this works.
All right, let's ask it
and
to go.
plenty of definable solutions as well as
yes,
to why
that's
it's gone
right.
wrong.
Cooked a soufflé,
it's
and it says that it's unappetizing. We might want to ask why. So I just press one button, and it comes up with a list of reasons why it might be
Plenty of
unappetizing.
ways, okay.
Okay. And
Yeah.
if I select one of them, for example, if you've ever cooked a souffle, you'll know that it often doesn't rise.
Yeah, never.
That's
Never,
right.
in my experience.
Then
Let's
I
find
can
out
ask
why.
all right?
Yeah.
It'll say the temperature is too cool,
Yeah.
eggs are underbeaten, or the mixture is the
So
wrong
you
consistency.
get alternatives. Now, could you actually add a rule to that? I mean,
Yes, all right, let's have a go. The temperature is too cool if the oven is broken. Okay, there's a reason why it might be too cool.
Yeah.
And now if I ask why, it'll say
It's been
the oven's broken.
added to the information.
That's
now,
right.
using this system, your pupils, they get a chance to get their hands on the experience of being a knowledge engineer,
Yes.
an expert, and a user.
That's right. We're trying to teach people what expert systems are about. And to do that, we're sort of taking each of the ideas of expert systems and writing little programs about
And you
them.
think it's important that the man in the street gets used to this idea?
Well, if expert systems are going to be used in their jobs later on, or if they're going to use them when they come into contact with people like citizens' advice bureaus, they're going to need to know what an expert system is, and they're going to need to know how it works.
Right, Jonathan, thanks very much.
Well, just like making soufflés, people learn partly by being told and partly by generalising from experience. One of the areas of the expertise of the Turing Institute is writing computer programs which learn from experience and then make up their own set of rules. Jim, how's that done?
Well, we do it in a very similar way to which human beings seem to do it. Let me give you an example. I recently went to Cairo and I took a taxi into the city from the airport. Driving down the road at high speed, we came upon a traffic light at red, and of course the driver went straight through it.
As they do, yes.
And I said, is this normal practice? He said, which traffic lights?
Offensive.
So I got the first rule, which was, basically, you ignore traffic lights.
As they
Shortly
do.
afterwards, we arrived at a traffic light which was on red, and he stopped. So I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, there's a policeman in the centre of the road. Well, that seemed fairly reasonable. Shortly afterwards, of course, we're going down the road, we meet some further traffic lights, they're at red, there's a policeman in the centre of the road, and he went straight through. I said, what's going on? Because my previous examples had now failed. He said he'd got his notebook out. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is the taxi driver may not really have understood what the rule was, but he knew what to do from a series of examples. And this is like experts. They may know their expertise, but they don't, in fact, understand always what that expertise is.
Can you show us a real program that actually learns from examples that's in use today?
Well, we've got a very interesting program here, a fairly simple but quite effective program called Expertise. And this is used, and you give it a series of examples, and it will induce a set of rules from those examples. And I've got an example here. The space shuttle can either be auto-landed or the pilots can land it. Now, the problem is the decision is taken at 10,000 feet. But in fact, it's only at 200 feet that you actually find out whether it's working or not. Now, pilots are fairly cautious individuals, and that's a bit late, actually, too.
Well, especially when you've got no engines and it's going to go down whatever you do.
There's no alternative.
No alternative.
So what we did, we got together a number of pilots, and we asked them to give us examples of the sort of conditions under which you'd choose whether to use the autoland or not. And in fact, you can see them on this screen. On the final column here, we have the basic decision, should we use the autoland or not? And then there are other factors which the pilots mentioned, perhaps at different stages, which were important, such as visibility, or wind speed, or whether the wind was a headwind or a tailwind, or whether the ship was stable or not.
Now, these are not really rules, these are just examples
They're just
of what
examples.
you've extracted from the pilots.
And from these, like the traffic lights, we can find out what the rule may be. Well, we can now actually look at the rule that we've got. Now, it may not be terribly easy to read, but basically it's saying, well, look at visibility first. If it's yes, then look at variation, a thing called variation. If that's small, then look at stability. If it's unstable, don't use the autoland. If it's stable, well, look at the wind speed. And here's some examples. And of course, one could go all the way down. It goes beyond the end of the screen, does the whole
I guess
rule.
the question is, has anybody used it yet to land it on the autopilot?
No, but we're actually testing it in the simulator for the space shuttle.
And this is the final rule that the machine has actually produced from just a set of examples given to you almost at random by those pilots.
The ones that you saw before.
Right, and they wouldn't actually know this rule, but they could look at it and find out whether it was correct. I understand. Well, if AI is so important, why aren't more people making use of it?
Well, it's really a question of choosing the right problem. People think, of course, that AI is all about constructing little metal men who rush around and cause mischief. In fact, we're trying to mechanize thought. And a lot of very useful techniques have already been developed in AI under certain circumstances. In particular, if you're looking at a very specialized knowledge area, then the system works quite well.
Because isn't AI a solution desperately rushing around looking for a problem?
No, I think if you take all the hype seriously, then I think you'll get it wrong.
You're a fool to think that AI can solve all your problems. You're also a fool to ignore AI. There's some very useful techniques.
It seems to me that we've gone almost completely round in a circle. At one time, everybody thought the computer was an electronic brain, something with amazing inbuilt intelligence. And today, everybody's got their own micro, and they know it runs exactly what you tell it to do. So if a computer's only that, how can it have any sort of intelligence?
Well, it's certainly true that a computer will only do what you tell it. But what if you tell it how to think?
Ouch.
Cut that one off. Right. Do we want one last one? What do you think? Let's have a vote. If I get 2 yeas, we'll go for it. If not, we will call it a night. Let me know. I don't mind. It's only 10 o'clock. We've got time for one more. In fact, fuck it. Let's put one on. Right, that was whatever it was. I can't even remember. I think that was number 9. Right. This is the last one. This is the last episode of series 1 of Microfile. Here we go.
Hello and good evening. Tonight's programme is about electronic information, an aspect of the new technology which is forcing huge changes on some of our most staid institutions.
Cheers,
Microlife commissioned Andrew Neil, editor of the Sunday Times and a leading advocate of the new technology, to investigate 3 industries under intense pressure to update themselves. Here's his report.
The commodity that matters today is electronic information. In feudal times, wealth came from the land. In the industrial age, the country grew rich on ships and steel, coal and railways. Now, fiber optic cables and satellite links are the railways of the information age. And they've turned information into an international commodity, which can be traded, sifted through, and used anytime, anywhere. Computers and modern telecommunications are at the heart of this information revolution. And every bit as much as the railways did 150 years ago, they're transforming the way we do business.
I know Mercury, is that not really something that exists anymore, does it? Stock exchange. Just in the setting of these little hexagon things.
The floor of the stock exchange, the heart of British capitalism, where shares in our major companies are bought and sold, and where fortunes are made and lost. Before too long, however, this bustling place could become just another museum, not because Britain will have gone bust, but because trading in shares will have gone electronic. The business end of the stock exchange would then look like this: a stack of telecommunications links distributing information about shares around the country. Under pressure from the government to update itself, the stock exchange has designed SIAC, a computer network that will allow a broker outside the exchange to get price quotes. It will be introduced in October.
What he'll get on the new system is the whole market in front of him at a glance by just looking at the screen, and he will have a clear definition of what the price of a security is at the moment he's looking at it. So in this case, we've got an example here where the price of ICI is 632 to 4, which means that if you're selling shares for your client, you must get 632 or better for him. If you're going to buy for your client, you mustn't pay more than 634. Right now, if you want to find out what the prices are in the market, you have to go in and ask people. Here you can see at a glance what they are, and then you have cut out that price finding out mechanism, and you can just concentrate on the dealing side.
SEAC is an example of a value-added network, VAN for short. It's a collection of individual terminals which are all linked into a central computer. The computer contains a huge amount of information and the software to process that information at incredible speed. The networks which access these large computers can stretch right around the world on satellite links, and most are privately licensed. At the moment, SEAC is simply distributing share information, but its computer is capable of allowing brokers around the world actually to deal in shares from terminals in their own homes. At present, the stock exchange won't allow that, but it will have to change its rules if it doesn't want to be left behind.
Old leverage folder still going strong even now.
In London, Reuters are already demonstrating an American network which allows you to buy and sell stocks in New York. Paul Julius Reuters started his news agency in 1851 by exploiting the stockbrokers' hunger for hard and fast information. He started out using carrier pigeons. But in July 1985, his successors finally bridged the gap between supplying information and dealing in stocks and shares themselves. They bought the rights to Instinet.
A dealer in stocks and shares requires news, information on prices. And the system we have introduced here is really a complete package. It enables the trader to look at prices in the world's markets and then to enter his orders on a computer terminal, so effectively replacing the traditional negotiation by telephone or by being physically on the stock market floor. So, shall we use the system to trade some Apple shares in the North American market? To do that, we call up the Apple display, and I see that in fact they're trading at the moment at $20 1/8, $20 1/4. That seems to me to be a good price. I think I'll buy a small number of shares of Apple. So I hit a single button, the buy button, and I enter my order, which will be 100 shares. And I want to buy them at market price.
But I'll buy some slaves.
And then I hit a single button, which will transmit the order to the Instinet computer. And the answer will come right back saying that I have bought 100 Apple shares at $20 1/4. Shall we sell the Apple shares now? And to do that, all I do is press the sell button
Last 10 seconds.
and confirm the quantity of shares, which is 100 shares. And the price is to be at the market price. And again, I simply press the action button. And within 2 seconds, I get a confirmation at the top of the screen, which would also be printed out on a printer. And this tells me that I've sold these shares at $20 1/8. So in fact, I'm afraid I've lost 1/8 of a dollar per share. That is $12.50, I'm afraid.
The stock exchange is going to lose a lot more than $12.50 to systems like Instinet unless it allows brokers to use the latest technology. Otherwise, London's stock exchange will simply fall off the world's electronic information network. Even that most conservative of institutions, the English law, has had to come to terms with value-added networks. Roger Evans is a barrister, and he's about to do something that the new technology does better, quicker, and simpler. Roger is trying to find references to a particular case, but using the traditional system is no guarantee that he'll be able to find all the references he needs.
We tend to be asked to advise professionally on unusual or very narrow questions. And we've almost reached the point in certain areas of the law where we've reached the limits of how far paper can work. Now, behind me are a large number of examples of encyclopedias of specific topics of the law, which are basically loose-leaf books, which are serviced by additional pages that we put in about a dozen times a year. Judges and barristers are very sceptical about them, although they're invaluable, for the simple reason people don't always put the pages in correctly. It's a rather difficult task, but an utterly moronic one for the idle pupil when he's got nothing else to do. So, although they are extremely useful, we always wonder whether they're completely up to date or whether they've been filed accurately. Now, Lexis is marvellous for making absolutely certain, on a very narrow point, that there is nothing further by way of learning to be discovered.
Lexis is a networked legal database with a high-speed indexing system. It's provided by an American company from a mainframe in Ohio.
Now, we're searching for examples of people who've lost their hair in injury. Now, to do this on Lexis, we take the word hair and we search for when it appears within 10 of loss, which is one possibility, or drop, or fall. Now, having formulated that request, we press the button, and the first case, which is not available, as it's a transcript probably anywhere else, and we suddenly discover it's absolutely uninteresting to us, because it's a case involving a fall and a hairline fracture. That is one of the problems with Lexis. We've produced a cluster of words which come up in another context. So that's not relevant. Next case, please. Now, this one also, which appears to be otherwise unavailable, being on a transcript, 49-year-old lady caught her hair in a revolving drill, as a result of which her hair was torn from her head, leaving her 2/3 scalped. Jesus. She has a considerable amount of hair loss. And then we look to see what the judge awarded. PSLA, pain, suffering and loss of amenity damages, and she gets the miserable sum of £3,500. Lexis does two things. It enables us to get our fringe areas much more quickly, and it's quite likely they would have been overlooked before on a manual search, simply on the grounds it's not worth going to that degree of trouble. Or alternatively, and this is very useful from time to time, Lexis puts materials on the database straight from the court reporter's transcript, more quickly, more easily, which we can't get hold of otherwise at all.
The British legal system is the basis of the law of many other countries, so you'd think that a British-managed network consisting of all of UK law would be much in demand. Norman Nunn Price had such an idea and set up a database called Eurolex. Soon he had 375 subscribers. Then in 1985, Eurolex got into cash flow difficulties, and Lexis UK stepped in to buy it up. Nunn Price believes that Eurolex offered much that Lexis didn't.
We had certain specialities, particularly our European law collection, which was the best in the world in the English language. Certainly we covered the community law and also, to some extent, the laws of Western Europe. In addition, we had Scottish law, which also was unique to us, and I think fulfilled a real need there.
But Eurolex's database now lies in suspended animation here in Sunbury-on-Thames. Lexis's UK operation, after buying up Eurolex, simply closed it down, and so killed its only major European rival.
There are very few British databases of any description. Most of the databases that are commercially available are American, and the Americans, of course, do very well commercially out of this.
Inevitably, the main problem is that they have tremendous scale, because the US market is gigantic by the standards of the rest of the world. I mean, about 85% of all online usage takes place in the USA. And this does mean that they can build huge, powerful, profitable enterprises within the domestic market. We can't do that. We can only build a profitable operation by being international from day one. And we're talking in terms of millions. And unless you are prepared and are powerful enough and have the kind of funding that makes that possible, then you shouldn't be messing around in this industry, because it's an industry for strong, powerful organizations, I think.
So, although we exported British law across the world, we cannot exploit its potential as electronic information. But there are others with the foresight to do so, and when they see a good thing, they take it.
Yeah, this programme was a lot drier than Micro Live.
over 200 years, the bulk of the British public's information has been printed on sheets of paper in London's Fleet Street. But the national newspaper industry is painfully succumbing to the logic of electronic information, which needs fewer people to handle it, and eventually will not even need paper to carry it into our homes. The shape of things to come became clear when Eddie Shah announced his intention to publish a national, which, although edited in London, would be distributed electronically to printing works in Manchester, Birmingham and Heathrow, saving massively on printing and distribution costs.
All I'm doing is bring provincial technology that's been there for a long, long time into the national newspaper scene. And I think the big difference in the future, possibly, will be that whereas national newspapers today are looked on as Fleet Street, the future national newspaper won't be Fleet Street, but it'll be a very, I think, strong and sort of vibrant national newspaper scene where you can have, because of the low cost of production, you'll be able to produce daily sports papers, daily fashion papers, all sorts of papers, special interest group papers, which you can produce for very low break-evens, and maybe up to 60 or 70,000 copies a day. And once you've got that going, it'll produce a much more diverse press. It'll bring about a multiplicity of titles, and it'll have a much wider base of ownership as well, and I think that's the important thing.
Appropriately called Today, Shah's paper will be in colour and entirely composed on computer. The weather map, for example, after being created on this machine, will then be transmitted along a network to the 3 printing centres. No ink or paper is used until Today hits the presses.
On a conventional paper, you'd have pencil and paper, and you'd start drawing. You'd probably find your pictures, and you might say, right, we'll put a decent picture there. We'll take this headline across 2 decks of, let's say, 48, 48. You draw it in like that, add in some headlines here. I think on this page you'd make it 48 across 4. And you'd write down your headlines and edit by guessing. Whereas on this machine, of course, just by the press of a button, then the story comes up in one screen and the column there. As I scroll down, the cursor follows where I am in the story. I can change it at any moment I want. There we have Olution. Let me just, for the sake of it, make it blue. Go back out, come down, and as I do that, the story goes on and on. And as I come to the end, here's the word, it tells me it fits. I then close that, press this button, and I come to the next story, open it, here we are, down I come. This tells me where I am in this copy. I change it if I want to, and so we go on, and I'm fitting.
One of the things we've done a lot of research into is the biggest thing we found that put people off buying modern newspapers was the ink that comes off in their hands. So even new technology applies to that, because the way that we put the ink on through control by computers and the type of ink mixing with the paper we're using should in fact ensure that even the ink doesn't come off in your hands. So we are not just, what you see around you is not all that we're changing. We're actually also changing the way that we print newspapers, and I think that is a big change as well.
But it's now possible to produce a paper that doesn't use any ink or paper at all. It's delivered straight into its readers' homes by telephone line. Micronet produces 30,000 pages of news and information on computer technology, which is updated day and night. Its editor, Simon Darcy, introduced me to exactly one half of his editorial staff.
Graphics on the database. I see. And also looks after the AI area, the artificial intelligence area.
That's 5th generation stuff.
That's right, yes, we try and cover as much as we can.
You're keeping up with the Japanese.
Trying to.
It's not easy.
I introduce you to Sid Smith, who is Micronet's deputy editor.
I see. What are you working on this morning?
Well, I'm subbing an article actually that one of our freelancers put in from home.
Yeah.
And obviously before it goes public, we need to sub it. It's a very easy process for them to put it into their home micro in their back bedroom or wherever, but we need to check it before it goes out.
Does it need a lot of work?
It's not too badly written, actually.
I think we better hire him. Thanks. So you've got a total of almost 30,000 pages, and yet you only seem to have 4 or 5 people there putting it together.
That's right, yes. It is quite unique in the fact that a lot of the information that goes up onto the database comes from journalists working from home. So there are some 30 or 40 journalists who have specific areas of interest, and they can update the database from their own home using their own micros, very similar to the ones we have here.
So they never have to come near a news office in central London or Fleet Street?
No, it's all done down the telephone lines.
Micronet is a value-added network which runs on home terminals of the Prestel database. It's the next stage in the inevitable coming together of the new technology and the old journalistic skills of information gathering. A potential which even the latest pioneers don't completely appreciate.
You can't pick up a terminal and take it on the train with you. You can't go to the loo with it. You can't do you can't cut out your favourite picture and look at it and keep it for a few days of a goal that was scored or a moment that you enjoyed. So I think newspapers will be around for a long, long time.
Long term, I see being able to program your computer with various names of journalists you particularly like, various sports that you're a habit of looking at, and being able to program your computer at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning to log on to a Prestel Micronet and then download very rapidly information which will then be printed out. So instead of sitting on the train in the morning with your Times, Guardian, Telegraph, whatever, you will have a printout with all your favourite journalists, your sports pages, cartoons.
You can make up your own newspaper.
You can make up your own newspaper.
The time is not so far away when stockbrokers, lawyers, and even newspaper publishers will all depend on computer networks to store, process, and deliver whatever information is their stock in trade. For these information industries, not being on such a computer network will soon mean not being in business at all. Britain cannot opt out of this information revolution. Computers and modern telecommunications are no respecters of national boundaries. If we don't develop computer networks, then somebody else somewhere will. The future of wealth and job creation in this country depends on Britain moving fast into electronic publishing now.
I've been joined now in the studio by Andrew Neil. Andrew, can we just look at some of the aspects you've treated in that film? Let's go back to the stock exchange. Surely the essence of an exchange is dealing. It's all right buying a small quantity of shares, you know, using a computer, but large quantity of shares, you don't know who's the seller and who's the buyer. They have to negotiate, look in each other's eyes, and I can't see that ever being done by a computer.
Well, to begin with, maybe not, and certainly when big deals are being done, personal contact will be important, and we did say on the film that they probably still like the stock exchange floor to have a good gossip. But individuals, shareholders, small savers right now who might be intimidated by the stock exchange and by the paraphernalia and professionalism of it, they might well want to use their terminals sitting at home instead of putting the money into a building society or the local savings bank, might well want to buy 100 Apple shares or any other kind. And the small saver will benefit from that access.
Let's go to this, the law, because there seems to be unnecessary job demarcation between solicitors and barristers.
There are many things where right now you need a solicitor and a barrister that will be done by a single status legal profession as time goes on. For example, if you're living in a little country town in England or Scotland or Wales somewhere and you go to the local solicitor, what's to stop in future that local solicitor having the terminal that we saw on his desk and being able to call up the most sophisticated legal advice immediately without having to go to the local big town to get a barrister and get into his network? It'll decentralize and help the small man and should reduce the cost of legal advice.
One of the problems, of course, is that in the United States they've got 10 times as many lawyers and a lot more lawsuits, but the cost of establishing the database is the same. It's probably going to be quite expensive initially in Britain.
Yes, it will be expensive initially, as all these things do. We think in very nationalistic terms. Even on the film that I made there, I was talking about creating a British legal database. What, though, what really could have stopped a British company putting American law onto its database and having American lawyers telecommute via their satellites into a database in London.
Let's get on to the print business. I really take issue about having a computer print out my newspaper at home. I can buy a year's supply of the Sunday Times for £25. That's 10 years for one rather poor quality printer. I don't believe for 1 minute anybody's going to print out their newspaper at home. You can't be serious.
Well, you might be right, and I have to say that I have a nagging suspicion that you are. What I didn't want to be accused of, though, is because I'm sure as lawyers and stockbrokers and stock exchange people watched that film tonight about what I was saying about them, they're all shaking their heads and saying, that'll never happen. Doesn't he realize 50 reasons why it won't? So I didn't want to be accused of being narrow-minded when it comes to my own industry, of not taking that technological leap forward. It could happen, but it will be slow.
Doesn't it all assume a huge drop in actual cost to the end user?
Yes,
telecommunications?
it does. But the one thing we know from modern telecommunications is that the cost of using it falls dramatically.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Andrew. Until next week, good night.
There you have it, folks. That was Microfile episode, what was that? 6, 7, no, 8, 9. What was that again? What did we do? Yeah, 6, 7, no, 7, 8, 9 and 10, yeah. Evening, Yamo. we've literally just finished. You're going to have to go back and watch that. Stuart, you were a trader in the stock exchange. Excellent. Anyway, folks, listen, I'm going to get going. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do. It's I do watch these from time to time privately, but it's nice to actually just sit down and watch them. It's interesting to think that some people will probably be watching this very video just to try and kind of catch up with these. But these things are they're interesting. It's part of history. And as a kid, I couldn't get enough of these things. I loved anything at all that mentioned computers. Though I have to say these were particularly dry. But anyway, in that bombshell, folks, I'm going to let you get going. I'm away for some hot chocolate. Until next